A warm welcome, everybody. Welcome and good afternoon if you're in the UK, and good morning if you're joining us from the USA. Good early morning, and thank you to our colleagues for joining us early today. So I'm Sean Horan. I'm a co-founder and joint CEO of Halpin Partnership. And Halpin very proudly joined Huron Consulting Group in March of this year. And we're now part of a global team providing transformational support to higher education institutions across the world. We are really pleased to be joined today by our US colleagues for what promises to be a fascinating webinar. The first one, what's going to be a series of these for UK and European university leaders. Today's webinar is being recorded, so you can watch it again, and you can absolutely share that with colleagues as well. And we're going to be looking at what's going on in the US and what lessons might be learned for us in the UK. An awful lot of similarities, I think, as we will see as we go along. So without further ado, I'm going to hand over to my other co-founder and joint CEO, who is going to host this today and take us through. So Susie Hills, over to you.
Brilliant. Thank you, Sean. And thank you to everyone who's joining us. We're really delighted that you're here with us today. As Sean said, we're going to consider what lessons UK universities can draw from the challenges that our US colleagues are facing. And we'll explore what some of those challenges are and what it means for leadership of those institutions. We're going to have plenty of time for questions. So you'll see at the bottom of your screen a Q&A box. You can post your questions in that. I'll keep a close eye on that and make sure we cover as many questions as we can. What we're going to do is hear from each of our panelists in a moment. I'll introduce them to you. We've got a wonderful team for you to hear from this morning, and we're very grateful to them for that early morning start. Firstly, I'm pleased to introduce Lee Smith. Lee co-leads the 300-person team that provides strategic consulting services across higher education, academic and administrative functions at Huron. Lee has expertise in operating model assessment and design, governance, academic medical centre strategy, operations and change management. Prior to joining Huron 7 years ago, Lee served in various administrative leadership roles at 3 US universities, including the role of Chief Operating Officer. Next, we're delighted to welcome Eric Barron to the panel. Eric is a senior advisor at Huron and has had a highly distinguished career in US higher education. His leadership roles have included president of Florida State University, and they culminated in the role of president of Penn State University, where he led the institution through a $2 billion fundraising campaign. Eric also undertook a number of senior sector leadership roles. He chaired a panel for the Association of Public Land Grant Universities on innovation and entrepreneurship, and he chaired the University's Research Association's Board of Trustees. Eric's a fellow of the American Association for the Advancement of Science and has had leadership roles with the National Science Foundation, NASA, and the US National Research Council. Our third panelist is Susan Basso. Susan is Managing Director at Huron, and she serves in our education practice, co-leading the organisation and talent strategy area. She focuses on HR effectiveness, workforce and talent strategy, operating model and service delivery. Prior to joining Huron, Susan spent 30 years in higher education at 4 different institutions where she served as their chief HR officer. Most recently at the Ohio State University, where she was the chief human resources officer across the university and the academic medical center. She then moved on to Penn State University in a similar leadership role, so 2 very large, complex, research-intensive institutions. Finally, I'm delighted to welcome Suzanne Hills-Wells to the panel. Suzanne is Managing Director at Huron, leading the advancement and fundraising team, and for the last 8 years, she's overseen the team in the UK. She has more than 25 years' experience in advancement, undertaking programme building, campaign planning, and implementation, and she's partnered with a wide range of higher education institutions globally. providing strategic counsel to teams and institutional leaders. Prior to consultancy, Suzanne was Vice Chancellor for Advancement at the University of North Carolina for the Arts, where she served on the executive team advising the Chancellor on major policy decisions. Her career has included leadership roles with cancer care, the Metropolitan Museum of the Art, and my favourite, the Museum of Modern Art in New York. The panel are going to share some introductory thoughts, and then, as I said, we'll open up for questions. So remember to put your questions in the Q&A box, and I'll hand over to Lee to get us started. Thank you.
Thank you, Susie, for the great introduction this morning, and certainly good afternoon to all of our colleagues who have joined this session. I want to talk a little bit about what we see as emerging themes in higher education in the U.S. And there are several themes that have particularly come to light over the past several months, although a lot of these themes have been in the works for a while. And the first one is that the landscape for higher education in the US is changing right now. The interaction between the American version of democracy and how colleges and universities operate in that democracy is being challenged in some ways, is being questioned as to whether it's working as well as it should be. And there's a lot of active debate across the country right now. I think that part of what we will see here is that there is not a minority of institutions that will feel an impact from a lot of the debates and discussions that are ongoing, but rather most colleges and universities are going to feel some substantive impacts from it. So there's not really a way as an institution in the US for you to say, we don't feel like we're going to be impacted by this. It's only those institutions in the headlines. To the contrary, we really think that the vast majority of institutions are going to feel some type of meaningful impact. When we look at the challenges that are emerging in the US, though, they're not single threaded. We're seeing increasingly integrated issues that are emerging. They may have to do with student recruitment, with finances and budget, with human resources, with a lot of the issues that I hope we will talk about over the course of this webinar. And it's the complex interaction of those that a lot of institutions are beginning to look at in more detail. And they're recognizing that to be successful in the future, they need to enhance the skill sets and the technologies that they have available to them. As part of this, though, we also are really seeing that the competitive pressure that exists across institutions is growing in a meaningful way. I mentioned student recruitment a few minutes ago, and we see that as an area that's going to become increasingly intense. You already see in the US, as a response to some budget shortfalls, certain institutions increasing the number of students that they're admitting into their institutions. That then is having a trickle down impact across many other institutions, particularly those institutions in the US that are of mid-size and smaller size. So this is all developing on top of what we already call a demographic cliff that has been in the works and that we've been forecasting for a while due to just fewer students now of the age to attend college. So we already knew the demographic cliff was coming. And then some of the other impacts that are emerging right now due to federal directives and executive orders from the president and so forth are really just heightening some of the issues that are emerging. We do anticipate, though, that there's going to be a lot of focus on how specific colleges and universities can differentiate themselves through new types of degree programs, through new majors, through trying to capture market segments that maybe they haven't focused on before. International student enrollment is going to be part of this conversation as well. A final theme that I will touch on as well is that we see leaders increasingly feeling a responsibility to be decisive in their actions, to be particularly forward thinking as they recognize that strategic action now is going to be necessary for the long-term stability and sustainability of their institutions. When we look back over the past several years, we note that there have been dozens of institutions across the United States that have had to close for various reasons. We think that those types of pressures are only going to be heightened in the future, and we're going to see many more institutions facing crises related to their ability to stay open and serve the student communities that they are there to teach. And so leaders are being bolder, they're being more decisive, and they're thinking about the change management strategies they need to put into place now in order for various initiatives to be successful there. So, Susie, I'm certainly looking forward to digging into a lot of these areas in more detail, but I'll turn it back to you to hand off to another panelist.
That's great. Thank you for those remarks to get us started. Lots for us to dig into. We're going to hear from Eric next. Eric, thank you.
Well, thank you. It's a pleasure to be with you. So I would start by saying, the U.S. universities are not a monolith. This is going to impact institutions, all this change very differently. But I agree completely with Lee that there's not going to be any institution that's going to be able to escape the sense of pressure and change that's occurring in U.S. higher education today. I'm going to look at a couple of key issues. So the first one is the whole topic of diversity, equity, and inclusion, and related topics such as Title IX, which talks about equal applications for men and women, for instance, in sports. So first of all, there have been multiple swings over the last several decades, depending on administrations. And I would say the pressure to conform in particular areas and change in a particular direction has grown over the last decade. What we see is the most visible institutions are making the news and feeling the brunt of this pressure, a Harvard or a Columbia. But in my mind, that's just a signal to the rest of the institutions that they also have to pay attention. And we're seeing in a lot of ways that pressure working. A week or so ago, there were already something like 350 US universities that had significantly changed their DEI programs. From my viewpoint, what we have to think about is what's important here. What is the goal of something like a DEI? Well, first of all, I like to think about it as a moral imperative to educate the citizens in your state or your country. It is also true through lots of studies that the student experience is better with a diverse population. And especially following off what Lee said and the demographic cliff, it is also part of the business model of a university because you need to attract those particular students. Well, so what do we do given the fact that this is why it's important? Well, you focus on the objective. I think it's time to rethink the how. And I think there's lots of opportunities to be strategic about how you achieve that student experience and moral obligation and that business model success without being caught up in the symbolism and the politics of DEI of the last couple of decades. The second topic is student enrollment. And here the limitations on international students, either by country or through fear that you won't be able to complete, these are significant issues. We also have the demographic cliff. We also have lower dollars for need-based students that are being proposed in the US or even happening. And there's a lot of potential for harm to budget models, long-term harm in terms of the production of scientists and whatever into the system, the availability for the jobs for the world's best and brightest students that you want to attract. So these are significant changes. Again, there's going to be a difference between institutions. The visible institutions, the premier institutions, the stronger institutions, the large publics are going to be more successful and going to invest more in recruiting. And some of the smaller institutions will follow this trend that has been occurring over the last decade of potentially closing their doors or cutting programs or other actions combining with other institutions. And it's interesting, it's causing a lot of institutions to start, educational institutions to start talking about things like ROI, return on the investment, very different than what we've talked about in the past. But again, an opportunity and a need to be strategic. I think it's incredibly important that you're thinking long-term. Don't lose sight of your mission. Don't have your mission be replaced by budget pressures. And there's lots of opportunities here in terms of recruiting, changing the scope of the institution, looking for opportunities to have your niche, as Lee said. A lot of opportunities, I think, again, to be able to focus on this particular issue. Research expenditures is the third topic I put on the list. We're now seeing some programs cut by keywords. That's something you can manage institutionally by not having those keywords, but having the same scope of research. More profound and significant is probably the whole agency cuts that are being proposed, because this will take a while to recover from. Very different if what's being proposed in a cut is a contract versus a grant. The grants are certainly more vulnerable for an institution, whereas a contract, you should be able to at least assume you can make it to the end of the term. There's lots of different actions that universities are taking right now. Some of them are backstopping. Some of the wealthier institutions are saying, okay, in the short term, I'm going to help you out. Other institutions, say the University of Pittsburgh on a health topic, is saying, nope, we can't afford it. We're going to cut the staff now, knowing that the weakness is going to appear in our budget. We can't afford it. Some are taking a wait and see attitude. Maybe we can make it to the next legislative election. Maybe that will change it. A lot of people, and importantly, are looking at collective efforts. American Association of American Universities collectively working the legislative systems. I do believe no matter what, there's going to be significant turmoil for a couple of years. There's going to be gaps in what the funding is. I think there's a lot of promise that it will change in the future back, because the research topics are so important. What's the strategy? Well, it's really important to prioritize what's important, where your strengths and your weaknesses are, and what you're not willing to give up and what you are willing. Every university has its new priorities or enduring priorities. What is your opportunity to be able to address some of those priorities, which are going to be strong, maybe even regardless of what administration is there? And another element here is the whole notion of you're buffeted by all these changes. You need to be able to think, what is going to happen? The trains will run again. Are you going to be ready to get on that train? Or are you going to watch it go by because you've been just looking at short-term effects? Again, I think small universities, smaller research capabilities, they are more likely to be vulnerable than a large university, but large universities are certainly going to be vulnerable. Third topic is to note that the sum of all these things is actually greater. I think that, I guess that's the fourth topic, is actually greater than any single one. A lot of universities are just emerging post-COVID. Enrollment declines were already happening with this demographic play, are not going to grow. The federal support for need-based dollars is at risk. The ability to attract diverse students has to change. There's pressure on tuition There's an inability of many states to step up to what might be lost in other areas because they're feeling different types of. So here is a whole compounding set of issues that we have to address. And again, less visible, less capable institutions are going to have struggle surviving in there. But this may also yield a lot of strategies for different institutions in order to step in. There are a lot of ways that institutions just in general are responding. Some are fastening their seatbelts. I'm going to wait it out. I'm going to see what this election is. Some are hoping to ride under the radar. I think that's going to be a challenge. Some are going to react with everything that comes over the transom. And they're going to capitulate in some cases, but they're going to react each time. I think it's incredibly important to sit there and take the time to be strategic. So doing that is a matter of just a few topics here to think about. One is to increase the focus on risk analysis and management. If you really think about it, universities are U.S. universities are pretty primitive in terms of how they do this compared to the private sector, for example. There's a lot of room here to do better. Universities think about compliance on research grants. They don't really think about all these balls that are up there in the air. A more comprehensive, second topic, more comprehensive approach to budgeting. Clarity in your revenues and expenditures. Perhaps different budget models are there. And it's important to remember that if revenues are flat and tuition is constrained, even budget cuts don't get you to the end game because inflation will make sure you have to cut again the next year. You have to think about both the revenue opportunities and the opportunities for cuts and saving. And you need to make sure that you keep your mission and quality in focus so that return on investment doesn't end up minimizing accomplishing your missions. And the very last thing is those trains will start moving again. And if you're spending all your time being reactive to what comes over the transom, then I don't think you're going to be prepared for when the trains are moving again. It's time to take the time in the midst of all this semi-chaos to be thinking about what might be the future. Thanks much, Susie.
That's brilliant. Thank you very much, Eric. That was really helpful and insightful. We're going to hear from Susan about what's going on with our talent during this challenging time. Susan.
Thank you, Susie. Hello, everyone. I'm also delighted to join my colleagues to be with all of you today. U.S. universities are also facing significant talent challenges, especially in a post-COVID era, particularly in recruitment and retention of both faculty and staff. And the challenges are really driven by factors such as increased competition from the private sector, shrinking pools of qualified candidates, and sometimes difficulties in building consensus within institutions. So I thought I would speak to some of the specific talent challenges we are seeing and what universities are doing and what we're often helping them address. So in the recruitment space, universities are definitely competing with higher paying private sector jobs, especially for tech-related roles. Also, budget constraints are also restricting institutions' ability to offer competitive salaries and benefits, making it a little bit more difficult to attract and retain qualified talent. So universities that are getting a better handle on this are doing things like monitoring and evaluating recruitment efforts, really tracking key metrics such as time to hire, what is the cost per hire, and candidate satisfaction to really identify areas where they can improve. We're also seeing limited talent pools. A much smaller pool of qualified candidates exists for certain positions, particularly leadership roles. Right now in the United States, we have a very tight labor market, and candidates are having evolving expectations, including what is being expected of leaders. So institutions are having to rethink their employee value proposition and really emphasize and clearly communicate what makes the institution unique. Also, some universities are really struggling to compete with the flexibility that's offered by private sector remote work options. And we're really now even seeing more universities facing competition from institutions worldwide for both students and faculty, particularly in specialized fields. Also, universities may have overly complex or outdated position descriptions that hinder their ability to recruit. So they are finding the need to really optimize position descriptions to really accurately reflect the role and responsibilities, and that has become incredibly important. Also, United States universities have some really cumbersome administrative processes and procedures that really can make it difficult to hire and retain staff. So we are seeing institutions simplifying and speeding up the hiring process because the traditional committee-driven hiring process in higher ed can be extremely slow, potentially causing institutions to lose out on desirable candidates. So recruiters are constantly working to improve efficiency and reduce the time it takes to fill those open positions. And many universities are considering wholesale operating model redesigns, including things like streamlining processes and workflows to make work easier and less burdensome and more attractive to candidates. Turning a little bit to the retention challenge, there are voluminous workloads and stress that can really lead to burnout and higher turnover rates, especially among staff and administrators. And a negative or unsupportive work environment significantly impacts employee morale and retention. So we're seeing institutions regularly acknowledging and really trying to show outward appreciation for the contributions that faculty and staff are making, which is ultimately boosting morale. Additionally, the low compensation that I referenced with recruitment, it's also a challenge from a retention perspective. Salaries in higher ed maybe have not been as competitive with the private sector, especially for specialized roles. And often in universities, the compensation setting is often a budget-driven process versus a market-driven process. And so we're seeing universities starting to pay a lot more attention to what is going on in the market and utilizing their human resources professionals to really help them understand that. Also, lack of flexibility. Universities may not offer the same level of flexible work as other sectors. So really promoting work-life balance and offering more flexible work arrangements is really helping to improve that employee satisfaction. And then outdated HR practices. Many institutions haven't updated their talent management processes to reflect current trends in employee experience. And so there are limited opportunities for professional development and advancement, which often can lead to frustration and turnover. Additionally, universities are seeing a lot of skills gaps. There can often be a mismatch between the skills that employers need and the skills that are possessed by the existing employees. So they're really looking to provide opportunities for career growth, training, mentorship. Those are the things that are really enhancing employee engagement and retention. And they're also using more advanced technologies to inventory and track skills. And that impact of technology is significant. Most universities must adapt to the technological advancements to really be able to attract and retain professionals who can keep pace with the innovation. So we are definitely seeing an increased use of AI and predictive analytics in recruitment and other areas of the institution. And so institutions are required to adapt those strategies and technologies. And lastly, universities are facing growing demands and financial constraints. which is really requiring significant changes in how work gets done, which can be difficult on employees, and it is putting a strain and requiring them to be more supported. So universities are really looking to find ways to offer that kind of internal support to their faculty and staff. So that's what I have for today, and back over to you, Susie.
Brilliant. Thank you, Susan. That was fascinating. We're going to hand to Suzanne now, who's going to explore how fundraising teams are responding to the challenges.
Thank you so much, Susie. Good morning from Chicago. And much of what I'm going to talk about today, I think is going to be very familiar to the participants in our webinar. I had the chance to be with Sean and Susie just a couple of weeks ago to discuss some of these same trends. And really, we see a lot of similarity to things happening in the UK. So the first thing I wanted to talk about is I think it very consistent with some of what Eric and Lee in particularly talked about, this idea of an unclear value proposition for higher education. Last week, I got to see a panel with some university presidents, and Gabrielle Starr, who's the president of Pomona College, talked about how well in the United States, but I also think this is true in the UK, how well we have defined the impact of higher education in a personal way, in a private way, on the individual student, on the individual family. That's a lot of the messaging that we've really used over the last few decades here in the US, and with a little less focus on the public good. And you can see that in the US when you look at trends in attitudes towards higher education. There is just a growing gap in how people who've received a higher ed degree and people who haven't, their trust and confidence in higher ed as a sector. So the need to talk about that public good, particularly around the research agenda. Over the last 80 years in the United States, it's very difficult to look at a medical or technological breakthrough that impacts, the quality of our everyday life and not, follow that thread back and find an academic institution at the beginning. So we really haven't done a great job of that, and particularly in the US, where we see pretty dramatic cuts in things like funding for research and healthcare. We need to help people understand that even if you yourself have not been associated with this institution, you've probably benefited greatly from the work that happens there. The second is budget reductions. This week, I'm in Chicago with a group of vice presidents of advancement from some of the leading fundraising programs in the US. And what we're spending a lot of time talking about mandatory budget reductions. Virtually all of our clients have been asked either to implement or at least to model at this point budget cuts at 5, 10, 15, 20% levels. One of these institutions just launched its biggest campaign, and by virtue of the size and prestige of the institution, one of the largest campaigns ever in history. At the same time, about 6 weeks after their public launch, they were asked to implement a 20% reduction in expenses, just like the rest of the university. So how do we do more with less? These are not inefficient programs. So how can we think about where we focus? Which really brings us to AI and new technology. There's a growing interest in using technology, but there's also a growing understanding that in order to use AI well, we have to have a database that is up to date and we've captured information well. We have to make sure that we've got the right policies in place to ensure that we are being mindful of privacy. And not all of our institutions even have policies written yet that cover some of these issues. So there's an interest and an understanding that this won't replace people, but it can certainly help our efficacy, but we're not always situated yet to really take full advantage of this emerging technology. And, you know, there are a lot of competing priorities right now for attention. I'm sure Eric can talk to us about what has happened in moments of crisis for a college president. We know that they are critical to really the fundraising enterprise, but there are so many competing priorities. Even our vice presidents of advancement, particularly those who are long serving, who are close advisors to the president, helping them stay focused on the work of their team while they are being called into really important discussions. And how do we react to a time that is, in the United States during certain weeks, I would say tumultuous, verging on chaotic. So how do we really keep that institutional focus to make sure that we are advancing our big ideas? It's not unlike in the US during COVID, I would say, and you can see how this affected giving. Giving during COVID in the US really spiked. There was a lot of very clear focus, and we were focused on the people who could help us now. At the same time, we took our eye off the ball a little bit on our further pipeline. We stay focused on the people who were already important to us, and then you saw a dip post-COVID. And part of that, I think, was this need to focus on the immediate need and a little less focus on the long-term need. This is especially important in the US because right now in the United States, just about 50% of households make a philanthropic contribution. That number has dropped by over 20% in the last 20 years. So as we think about what will the future look like if we continue to focus only on those who are capable of making large gifts now, we're losing that opportunity to engage the broader audience and also the audience that will be important to the future. The other way that this impacts our universities is because those alumni, parents, friends who are very engaged have also been effective advocates, going back to my first point about the value proposition. And you can see that, Susie, when we were in the UK, we had a number of leaders of institutions talk to us about the articles that they'd read about Harvard and how they were able to really mobilize those friends to help tell the story so it's not always coming from the institution. And we just know alumni, parents, friends who give are more engaged. They are more likely to be your advocates, your allies during this time of need. At the same time, with these enormous cuts in research funding coming from the government, we do have an immediate need for cash. So a lot of, again, the conversation this week is about how do we balance that? How do we not lose focus on the long term, but ensure that the research we already have underway has the support that it needs? And because we've talked about a lot of really hard things this morning, I wanted to end on a high note. In the United States right now, the economic environment is very favorable for those who are capable of making major and principal gifts. And we see that, you know, a number of our clients in the United States, most universities' fiscal years end at June 30th. And we're hearing this from clients. They have had record-breaking fundraising years. So not only is the economic climate very positive for giving, we do see people, you know, in looking across the landscape and understanding the importance of universities and their mission, stepping up and saying, now is the moment, and I want to do some good in the world. Philanthropy is certainly a place that I can impact, places whose missions continue to make the world a better place. So those are some of the big things that we see, and you can see it really weaves in with what Lee, Eric, and Susan said. As we think about all of these things together, what's our opportunity for growth, balancing the many challenges our university partners are facing? So with that, Susie, I'll turn it back over to you for questions.
Brilliant. Thank you, Suzanne. Thank you so much. Do post your questions in the chat at the Q&A box. I've got some coming in, which is great. I've got a couple of questions to get us started, and I think the first one's probably for you, Lee. Here in the UK, many universities are facing really tough budget decisions in the face of deficit budgets. They're making challenging decisions. From your client work in the US, what would you say some of the guiding principles there should be for leaders when they're making these difficult budgetary decisions?
Thanks, Susie. Yeah, it's a great question and a very timely one that we're really helping clients to answer on a daily basis. I would answer it in several ways. First is to have guiding principles for how you're going to make decisions. I think some of the institutions that I see struggle the most with budget reductions are those that go at it with an across the board cut where everybody has to reduce expenditures by the same amount, call it 3%, 5%, 7%, whatever the number is, where you are spreading the pain equally across the institution, but you're not necessarily setting up your most critical programs and operations for success. So, for example, if you are a tuition dependent institution that needs to focus on student recruitment for success, reducing the size of your admissions operation is probably not going to help you achieve your goals. You have to be more strategic than that. I think the second point I would make is that you what we generally find is you cannot cut your way out of these types of challenges. Eric made a very similar point in his commentary. And so it's the institutions that are most successful are looking at both expense reduction and revenue generation strategies in order to figure out the mix that's going to make them successful. Now, when you start drilling down and looking at the different types of actions that you may need to undertake, there are a couple of categories that we encourage people to look at. But to do that in the context of what is most mission critical for their institutions, what are your priorities? And so let me walk through those areas quickly. The first would be an obvious one, which is resource efficiency. So when you look at your spend across labor and non-labor, where are there opportunities through improved procurement strategies or through other means to reduce some of the expenses that you are experiencing right now. Also looking at your organization. And so really piggybacking here on some of the comments that Susan had, is your organization, your operating model, how you get administrative work done, is that really optimized? And then looking at your revenues and do you have meaningful diversification in your revenue sources overall? But my encouragement to you is not to stop there. Also looking at a second category, which is what we tend to call institutional positioning. So this includes the way that a lot of external individuals perceive and interact with your institution. These are students, these are parents, these are donors. So what is your academic portfolio, that collection of academic programs? What is succeeding for you there? What is struggling? How do those programs align with your priorities? Second, your student life cycle. So when you're recruiting, who are the students you're recruiting? Do you need to start to penetrate new markets there? What is your overall strategy? And then, of course, the advancement components that Suzanne just detailed in a really helpful way. Third, I would also say you should look at your operational maturity. So part of that is technology and how you're going to leverage technology to help make you more efficient. We haven't said, we've said a little bit, but we can say even more about AI and the role that it's going to play in institutions. But of course, there's a whole host of other technology related solutions that help institutions. Also, what are strategic partnerships that you have? Can you build additional partnerships with external entities that are going to help drive success? And then finally, what is your policy and governance structure? And do you have policies that are inhibiting progress for you or that make agility extremely difficult for you, you may need to look at those to help free up the ability for people on your campuses to be innovative and entrepreneurial. So taken together, we frame this all as what we call institutional resilience. And we often say, again, you're not going to be able to cut your way out of the challenges. You need to look at this mixture of all of these elements and then tie that to what is most mission critical for your institution.
Thank you, Lee. That was really helpful. It's a long agenda that our leaders have in front of them, as we've heard, and institutional leaders in the UK are feeling under more pressure than ever before, I think. I wonder, Eric, what guidance you've got for leaders and in how they navigate under this tremendous pressure.
Yeah, so if you'll excuse me for telling a little story here in the process. I learned to drive in Atlanta, Georgia, on streets in which cars were parked along the side of the road. And my father was sitting next to me, and I'm swerving my way down the busy roads. And I don't know how he could have been so calm that I wasn't sideswiping cars as I was driving down the road, but he was very calm and he turned to me and he said, Eric, if you lift your head above the hood ornament, that tells you how old I am. If you lift your head above the hood ornament and look down the road, you will discover it's easier to get where you want to go. And sure enough, looking down the road, the car begins to straighten out and you go. I think the thing that concerns me most is the number of cases where I see where institutions are spending their time being reactive to whatever is the next thing and not taking the time to look down the road. And so in my mind, that strategic part of running a university becomes critical, not just so you survive a catastrophe that occurs or the next thing that the government provides or whatever else, but you're keeping that mission in mind. It's like that old adage, what is it? It's, write your goal in pen and your path to get there in pencil, but keep in mind those objectives. And I think it works in so many different areas. When Florida State was experienced a 25% cut in state appropriation, that's when it was that I arrived. And the mission required some level of resources. And I decided, instead of across the board cut, Suzanne, to increase my support for philanthropy, because that was the longer term solution to what had to happen, even though I might be buffeted by change. I think the same thing at Penn State. We set off a $2 billion 6-year campaign, and we looked at our strategic plan before we set our goals for the campaign. Because if we could convince someone of the importance of our strategy and where we were trying to go, then that informed how well we would make an argument or a case for our alumni and friends on the resources that we needed. And it turned out to be very effective. We even had our alumni help pick the topics that were part of that strategic plan that were most appealing to them. So I guess this is my singular piece of advice is lift your head up and look down the road, because then I think you've got a lot more capability and ability to make sure you focus on your mission and not just what's hitting you on a day-to-day basis.
That's great. Thank you, Eric. I love that. Write your goal in pen and the plan in pencil and adapt as you go. That's terrific advice. That it kind of leads on to a question that's come in that I think Suzanne could help us with, which is about how universities are mobilizing their alumni communities to support them in different ways during this time.
Yeah, and I want to highlight what Eric just said. You know, there are few, if any, areas of universities where the ROI on the dollar is higher than it is an advancement. And university presidents, particularly in North America, know that. But I think what Eric just pointed to, it does require bold leadership to say that. We're going to invest in the places that are going to have an impact on the longer term, even if it makes some of the people on campus unhappy now. And I do think in some of these cases where we are seeing, you know, the exact thing Lee said we should not do, across the board cuts, it really is to try and manage message and avoid criticism. It is impossible to lead well and never be criticized. So I think if that is your goal, you should probably be in a different job. But now to your actual question about how to mobilize our alumni. I think what we're seeing work really well are strategic communications to alumni with critical, crisp messaging about what are the messages we want them to be taking out, not just to the government or the legislature, but actually to the other people in the alumni community. What are the things that we want them to be able to tell? What's the story our university needs to tell? First, you know, on campus. Second, to our broader community. And third, to the general public. So I think developing those clear messaging, talking about what does activism on behalf of your university look like? It is sharing those stories. It's thinking about those influential alumni. It's a call to action to get them to become more engaged at this moment, to invest in the university, to make those gifts. Those are powerful messages and they're noted. You know, I was recently speaking with a colleague at Case, which does a lot of advocacy work. He leads a lot of their advocacy work, and he was talking about advocacy from a public official for a change in how individuals in the United States are allowed to uh, claim a tax benefit for gifts. And he said, you know, this is a Republican elected official, but who really had heard from a lot of people in the sector and also in his home state about how this would positively impact the institutions that are impacting the lives of his constituents. They spent a lot of time kind of sharing information, but then he heard from people, and he heard from people that these institutions matter. They're mobilized to help. So I think there's a lot we can do as private citizens, but first and foremost, as institutions, we've got to be clear and crisp. And what are the couple of key messages that we want everyone in our community to be able to repeat about why we matter and what's at stake?
Great, thank you. I've got a question that's coming around staff restructures, and many UK universities are facing really, or in the process of undertaking really significant staff restructures. And I think, Susan, it would be lovely to hear from you, perhaps the top 2 or 3 lessons that you would draw from where you've seen effective restructures in the US.
Yeah, thanks for that great question, Susie. So you've heard quite a bit already about budget reduction challenges universities are seeing. And now many are choosing a more strategic path, as Eric suggested, which now includes wholly redesigning their operating model and how they deliver services. And so sometimes that does involve reducing headcount. And so I would say for me, lesson one, organizations that do it well invest a lot of time on the front end, assessing and planning, really analyzing the current state structure and defining the objectives, especially what they hope to achieve. So whether they want to reduce cost, improve efficiency, or be more market competitive, I am seeing them being much more transparent about it. Lesson 2, there is always a tremendous amount of disruption and anxiety in a restructure of any kind. So thinking about people first is super important. And leaders have a really critical role in guiding that process, communicating the changes, and really supporting the employees. We're seeing them set a more clear vision for the restructure, communicating the rationale and expected outcomes, and they're actively engaging with their stakeholders. And then I would say lesson 3, they implement robust communication and change management strategies to really help employees adjust to the new structure and minimize as much as possible the disruption. And those that are really forward thinking invest in upskilling the employees to ensure that they can perform their work in the new environment. So I guess in summary, in my experience, a successful org restructure really requires a strategic, well-planned, and employee-focused approach.
That's really helpful. Thank you, Susan. Good question from Jennifer Sewell, who's asking, are US universities looking at mergers and shared services? And what are the challenges to this? Perhaps Lee first on that one.
Sure, it's a terrific question, and I'll answer both parts of it. So, mergers have definitely become a topic of increased interest among a number of institutions in the US, and we've been fortunate to be involved with helping with the due diligence processes that go along with a lot of those activities. It's not only mergers, it's also in some cases acquisitions where one institution will actually acquire another one. A good example there is recently Northeastern University acquired Marymount Manhattan College in New York City. They Marymount Manhattan is or was an arts college. There was an opportunity for Northeastern to gain a foothold in a geography that was attractive to them, but also to pull in some new academic programs. On the other end of the spectrum, you have some substantive mergers that have taken place. One of the largest examples is the University of Texas San Antonio and the University of Texas Health San Antonio, all merging into one large university. So there's a broad spectrum of activity in that space. I think one of the challenges that a lot of institutions face is that by the time they recognize that they need to look at options that fall into this mergers and acquisitions category, they often wait too late to a point where the amount of debt or structural deficits within their institution have grown to such a level that their institution is no longer really attractive as a potential merger or as an acquisition. So certainly as institutions begin thinking about this, time is of the essence to begin a process. Whether you are looking to expand your portfolio and pull in other institutions, or whether you're an institution under stress that's looking at mergers as a possible path to sustainability, you need to start the process sooner rather than later. On the shared services front, shared services remains a very timely topic in a lot of ways. The term shared services has become a bit pejorative in the US, and so a lot of people don't tend to use that precise term anymore. But the idea that there are operational efficiencies to be gained, as well as opportunities to deliver better service across a number of administrative functions, that is top of mind for a lot of US institutions. And this goes across services in human resources, in finance and budget, in in procurement, in a variety of different areas on campuses. And the traditional model of shared services, where you create these large service centers on campus that sit centrally and deliver service to the entirety of campus, or in some cases, deliver services to several different institutions within a system, that is one model that works well for some institutions. But there are a number of other models that have emerged as well that don't necessarily involve moving the entire service center to a central function within the institution. You can organize service delivery in a number of different ways that allows you to achieve some efficiency and improve service. And that design is really dependent on what individual institutions look like. So yes, both of those are very popular topics right now.
Thank you. Susan, have anything to add
Susie,
in
is it
terms of
okay if I
how...
just add a little bit
Oh,
there?
yes, please do, Eric. Thank you.
Okay, so, I multiple experiences there that I think follow on well with what Lee said, and including having an institution approach that state about whether they could merge or be one of our campuses. And I must admit, the first thing you think about is they're in trouble. It's more trouble than it's worth. So I think that early and thoughtful part ahead of time makes a lot of sense. I also watched the entire state of Pennsylvania with all the public state institutions create a single buying power element to save money. And of course, one of the issues there was whether they created more bureaucracy so everything slowed down, but nonetheless, a lot of opportunity. And I think it's valuable to think that there may be innovation in this space as well. So, for example, think of how many institutions have to have a faculty for a small cadre of students for which they may say need that advanced computer science class in order to function, but they're teaching it to a small set of students, and they start thinking about whether or not they should be able to keep that program. We had cases where you could actually share a faculty member, and instead of paying for a course and have this not be connected to the institution, you could give someone a permanent job, but they're teaching at more than one institution. I think it's an interesting thing to be more innovative in terms of your opportunities for what that means to be collaborative in order to save some money, but provide what you need to provide to students and faculty.
Excellent, thank you. Really helpful examples. Susan, was there anything you'd like to add from a sort of workforce perspective on shared services?
Nothing really to add in addition to what Lee and Eric have already said.
Okay, brilliant. One of our attendees is posing a problem to, well, potentially an opportunity to us. So they're saying, if you were a leader of a leading London university with a top tier healthcare program, how would you take advantage of the turmoil in American universities? This particular person senses that there's significant interest in American-based students and faculty, maybe philanthropic donors too, in opportunities outside America. How do you all think they should approach these opportunities to build on their strengths and deliver their mission? So is there an opportunity here for a leading London university with a top tier healthcare program in terms of the challenges that are going on in the US? Maybe we'll start with Lee and then we'll hand to Eric.
Yeah, it's a terrific question, Susie, and certainly with all the work that I do in academic medical settings, it's one that's very relevant for me. But first, I would start by just highlighting the general popularity and growth within health programs across an allied health spectrum. There's substantive student interest in this area, and really substantial growth. There's, of course, as well on the faculty side, quite a bit of interest in research in these areas as well. And as I know people are aware, the research environment in the US has been under particular pressure so far this year with the way that grants are approved, with the approval of what we call indirect cost recovery. So essentially, the infrastructure costs that the federal government pays to universities to support research programs. And so out of all of this, I would say there's a couple of trends that are emerging. First, I agree with the person who posed this question that there is opportunity. And I think that both students and faculty are going to be looking abroad at increasingly looking abroad at different options that might be available to them. I think, though, the context here is important as well. We are seeing innovation emerge in the US in a number of academic program areas, but particularly in health areas, as we see new in some cases, new institutions, in some cases, new colleges within an institution being created in these areas. So the amount of interest in the US right now in creating new schools of medicine is at a level higher than it has been in decades. But we're also seeing the creation and advancement of other allied health programs as they pop up everywhere. And in the environment we're in right now, where accreditation is likely changing. The role of the federal government with the US Department of Education is changing as well. There is the potential for innovation to emerge in particularly in these health fields in ways that we've not seen before. So my encouragement to someone who has a top tier health program is, first of all, is there an opportunity to market to US students and faculty? Yes, absolutely. I think there is. But you're going to be doing so in an environment of increased innovation in the US as well. So I would encourage you to think through, how do you recruit on both the student and faculty side by highlighting and creating programs that are increasingly entrepreneurial, innovative, that are different moving forward, because I think that's some of what students and faculty are going to be looking for going forward. Eric, I'm curious what your reaction here is as well.
I think it's hard to do better than the answer that you provided there. I will say that I do believe that there's an awful lot of individuals, and the health profession is probably even more true, which have more allegiance to their research and the opportunities for their research than they have commitment to their institution. And so if you're providing opportunity and providing opportunities for a team, I think your ability to recruit on the faculty side could be quite strong. And I think the other notion in terms of marketing for students, there's quite a bit of stress. Having a daughter who got her MD from Columbia, there's quite a bit of stress in the application and achievement process. And I believe that a lot of students are looking for a combination of stability in their program and what the outcomes are as they come out of the program in terms of job opportunities and sometimes a lot of other characteristics like work-life balance. And so I think the opportunity for marketing at a high quality institution in London is probably high. And so I agree totally with the innovation question, but I think there's a lot of room for marketing on both the faculty side and the student side.
That's great. And maybe, Suzanne, could you
can I just add one thing to what Lee and Eric were saying? So this is anecdotal at this point because it's early days, but I will say I was speaking with a group of Canadian institutions just to highlight what Lee and Eric were just talking about. They talked about sort of record numbers of applicants, student applicants from the US, but it was really unclear whether that was going to result in yield. It's one thing to say, I'm frustrated, I'm going to apply to a Canadian institution. It's another to commit to that, as Eric said, moving to another country and the reality of that. So I think what they highlighted about what is your unique value proposition is incredibly important. We can't just assume the same undergraduate experience will feel the same as a student in Montreal as it does in California. So I think being really thoughtful about that, about how you want it, where it will make a difference for you and how you can make a difference to those students is what would actually move the needle on enrollment.
Thank you. And our questioner asked about philanthropy as well. What might the opportunity be for a leading London university around philanthropy in the US at the moment?
So, as I said, this is a very positive economic environment for philanthropy. And one of the things that has really shifted with generational shifts here in the US is that donors who make the largest gifts are interested in where they're going to have the most impact. So for instance, going back to if you're a leading London healthcare organization and you are leading the world's best research in a particular health issue, I would say that your universe of potential supporters is not just people in the UK. It is anyone who really cares about that as their most important philanthropic priority. And we see that very sophisticated donors who have a medical issue that they or someone they love and they want to solve it fast. They're doing a lot of research about who is innovative, who is creating the breakthroughs, and that's where they want to invest. So I would absolutely think about where can you make the credible case that investment here is going to move the needle on the thing that you are most interested in, and find out who are those people who are making those investments. Tell your story in a way that people who are looking to educate themselves on that will be able to identify you. So I think, again, just like it's a positive economic environment for US institutions, I think that absolutely extends to global institutions who are world leaders in the issues that donors want to help fix.
Brilliant, thank you. That's really great advice to our questioner. I've got a really interesting question that's coming from Simon Donoghue, and he's seeking uplifting and positive examples of institutional strategic development that we can learn from. He says it would be really nice to hear some positive and inspiring examples alongside this focus on cost reduction and survival in challenging environments. So have you any of you got uplifting and positive examples to share? Eric's waving. Yes, please.
Okay, I think there are a lot of them. I think there's a lot of fun to be had in a lot of ways. So I'll give an example. Watching in development, my alumni, the number of them that became entrepreneurs and saw themselves as self-made individuals who were giving back. Yet the institution didn't have programs in that area. The number of people that might be a history major learning how to think and work through problems, but yet going off into the business world or creating a company with some innovative idea. The interest level of students in doing things that solve problems. It might be a health problem, it might be something else, and think about actually creating a company. And realizing that universities actually have very limited programs that take you all the way from a coursework, minor innovation hubs that allow them to test ideas, getting assistance in developing them, the opportunities for investment dollars. There is a whole potential end-to-end ecosystem that I think universities just think about in terms of tech transfer. And so this became a strategic idea at Penn State, and it exploded. We had the law department provide some legal aid. Last year, 1,600 students sought legal aid in setting up their companies. It's an area where a strategic idea of looking at your university and how your alumni were being successful and what your students were was all of a sudden an opportunity to create programs that then had absolutely tremendous impact. It's one of the things I'm most proud of. But I would say it's just one example. There are a lot of examples through philanthropy and through strategic thinking that have created just wonderful, unexpected success stories.
Susie, I might add, you know, despite the talent recruitment and retention challenges that I articulated, I would also say that it has become much more positive. You know, American universities have always touted the fact that they you know, are focused on their people, and that employees are their greatest asset and resource. But I don't know that it always felt that way internally to the faculty and the staff. And so I think, you know, post-COVID and with everything that's currently going on, I think institutions are really invigorating or reinvigorating their employee value proposition, rethinking their institutional values, re-articulating them to the community, and doing things like re-looking at compensation and benefits because they have to due to the competition. Some institutions in the United States never even had a job architecture or a robust salary structure. Now they are doing that so that they can be more competitive. They're looking at opportunities that where they can, in fact, be more flexible in the work. And then even on the other side of these large scale operating model redesigns, I think employees are really finding that it really is, in many cases, a path to reducing some of the administrative burden and making the work that they have to do a lot easier to do. And so I think that has been an incredibly positive outcome of the times in which we're living.
Yeah, so I agree with both Eric and Susan that there are many great examples here. I'll mention one just on the academic programming front, and there certainly are a set of institutions in the US who have really been asking deep questions about the undergraduate baccalaureate degree. Why does it need to take 4 years in order to complete that degree has been one of the questions that some institutions have been asking. And so if you look at places like Merrimack College, which is a private institution in the state of Massachusetts here, they have been part of a group to champion a 3-year baccalaureate program going forward. It's a really innovative degree program, and this type of activity that Merrimack and other institutions are pursuing right now, I think is going to be just the tip of the iceberg in terms of that innovation and entrepreneurial activity that I talked about earlier. And we're going to see institutions increasingly competing to roll out new types of programs that are going to address the needs not only of students, but also of employers across the country. So I think that this College in 3 program, it's a great, really uplifting example of how a traditional paradigm for undergraduate education has been challenged and has been evolved to a new model for some students.
As Susie, and I would add an example from Europe. If you look to Aalto University, which in the early 2000s was formed through the merger of a business school, a tech and design school, and an art school, it's gone on to be one of the top ranked universities in Northern Europe. and one of the top art schools in the world. And so I think we see that when it's done thoughtfully and well, and there was a reason to bring these programs together, the institution that lives on can be better than the sum of the parts.
Mm. Wonderful, absolutely. And a reflection from one of our audience members, Alistair, who said, on Simon's question, compare the average lifespan of a commercial organisation against the lifespan of a university, you'll find that we are, on average, amazingly resilient to the environment. So I think that's a very wise contribution. And absolutely, we will all live on through these difficult times. We're getting towards the end, so if you've got a burning question, now's the time to type it in quickly so I can ask it. I've got a question around governance, because I know there's some of our attendees are focused around institutional governance, and I'm wondering how boards of governors in the US are managing to be agile in the face of all these changes. That's often a question we're asked when we do governance reviews, is how can we be more agile? How can we look to the future in the way we operate? So any reflections on how boards of governors are responding? Perhaps Lee first.
Yeah, I'll be happy to answer that. And here in the US, the most frequent term we use are boards of trustees. And I think there's several trends that we're seeing there. One is that boards with this myriad of financial challenges that are emerging are getting increasingly engaged with university leaders on what the path forward looks like and what actions need to be taken in a very forward-looking way to address those issues. Um, the amount of communication and modeling and detailed work that is happening at this executive leadership level of universities to engage deeper questions that are emerging from their boards, I think is at a level higher than I've seen it in quite a while in the US. So Eric, I certainly would be curious what perceptions you have on the board front as well. But the amount of activity there is certainly increasing in the experience that I'm having.
Yeah, I think there's a lot of tendency to have been more reactive and more political. And I think it's incredibly important that the president is working with the board on the strategic and deeper questions. So the board is understanding where you want to go and why, and can become your advocate and supporter. Because I believe that if those communications are not strong, and if that faith in the leadership is not strong, then exactly what you're talking about, Lee, goes by the wayside, because they're more likely to want to help you negotiate a contract. They're more likely to question a particular academic program. And so I think it's not just boards, in many cases, the ones with good leadership wanting a deeper question and wanting to really focus on where that institution is going. I think it's an obligation for the presidents to make sure that they're going that way. And they make sure that they're working on those deeper directional questions, as opposed, and I say, to try to run the university because they think they're trying to help because they see what's going on and issues. They're very likely to read something in the newspaper and then want to know, okay, what are you doing there? And to be reactive themselves. So I think this is a partnership between boards and leaderships to be focused on the deeper strategic questions rather than many of these operational elements.
I agree, Eric, and there's definitely an educational element that takes place there to to train board members on how universities are structured, how they function, how decisions are made. Many board members come from private sector backgrounds where decision making, strategies, et cetera, look very different than the way that they look in higher education. And at times, there can be a desire from board members to want to superimpose those private sector practices and strategies into a higher education environment. Now, are there opportunities for higher education to shift some longstanding practices and to be informed by the private sector? Of course, there are always opportunities there, but you can't always just do a lift and shift and expect the same outcome that a lot of board members might want. And so it really becomes incumbent on presidents and their executive teams to really telegraph carefully to boards what they need from them, right? A lot of that is focused on the fiduciary role of boards and obviously some of the strategic direction they need to provide. But it's increasingly important that presidents really articulate, here is what we are doing to anticipate challenges we're going to have, to model different potential solutions, to lay out priorities and get that in front of their boards in a very structured and compelling way, which will then actually prevent some of the operationally focused questions that you just mentioned, Eric. If the boards are confident that the executive team is doing all of the appropriate diligence to prepare for and react to challenges, then there's going to be less of a desire to provide direct advice on rather granular operational issues.
Terrific, thank you. Well, we're coming towards the end now, and I want to thank all of you who've asked questions. They've been great questions, so we appreciate all of those. And we hope this is the part of an ongoing discussion around the challenges that the sector's facing. Thank you to the panel for their insights and the great examples that they've shared. We hope you found the discussions interesting, thought-provoking. We're certainly all living through extraordinary times in higher education in the US and the UK. If you'd like to continue the discussion with us and explore how we might support your institution, please don't hesitate to reach out to us. We'd be delighted to talk to you. And we look forward to welcoming you to future webinars as we work together to shape the role of higher education for the future. So thank you all for your contributions and joining us today.